Okay, hi everybody, I'm Sarah Balascio. I am a board certified art therapist at the Wellness Center at William and Mary. And for Earth Week this week, we are doing a special edition class on eco art. So for this, what you'll need is a couple rocks or stones, and I even have some other items, shells. You could use a leaf, but we're gonna learn about eco art, talk about it, and then we're going to make our own balancing stone sculpture. So before we start, we have a waiver that we read each class. It's more for some of our more like physical classes, you'll see. But with that said, I'm going to read it. In order to make these classes as freely accessible as possible to our participants, we'll be using a verbal warning and assumption of risk at the beginning of class. Participation in this online class is voluntary. Physical activity programs may result in injury, and by participating, you assume the risk of injury that may result from your participation. We strongly recommend that you participate from a space that is suitable for this activity. For example, make sure that you have moved nearby furniture and other hazards. If you're participating in a yoga class or a class that involves lying on the ground, we recommend using a mat, or if you don't have one, a carpeted area. Participants are encouraged to stop if they experience pain or injury. I am pretty sure that's not happening today, and should seek appropriate medical advice or care as needed. William & Mary Health and Wellness strongly recommends that each participant have an annual physical exam and follow the advice of your healthcare provider before participating. Okay. So welcome everybody, and like I said today, you'll just need with you a few rocks, but I want to start by, I'm going to share my screen, and I made a little PowerPoint as I said, which let me get to that. 1 second. Tell me, give me the thumbs up when I share my screen. Can y'all see my screen? Good. All right. So I made a fun PowerPoint that we'll go through. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about eco art. And oh, I guess I should maybe. Eco art. I'm Sarah Balascio, as I said. I'm a board certified art therapist at the McLeod Tyler Wellness Center here at William & Mary. I'll talk a little more in depth about what art therapy is, but first I wanted to start with kind of defining eco art. So eco art is a practice that embraces an ethic of social justice in both its content and form and materials. So meaning like what we're making has a theme about the earth, and also the materials we're using are respectful of the earth, or as I choose, usually like I simply use materials from nature. So eco art is created to inspire caring and respect, stimulate dialogue, and encourage the long-term flourishing of the social and natural environments in which we live. It commonly manifests as socially engaged, activist, community-based, restorative, or interventionist art. So eco art can use either, be effective in its use of materials being just from nature rather than traditional art supplies like paints or clay or drawing supplies, or the theme of your artwork is about like earth love. So or both, right? And then next, I wanted to go over some really well-known eco artists. Probably the most well-known is Andy Goldsworthy, who I just adore. His artwork is, a lot of it looks painted like you can see here, but it's really just materials from nature. So for example, he took stones and did this color gradient in nature, the white, the lighter, the light gray to the dark gray, placing those materials in nature and arranging them and making art just simply from the things in nature. He does a lot with leaves, as you can see. For example, he'll take wet leaves and place them on a rock like this, again in that color gradient. So there's like, the time spent in nature making it, as well as just the sheer beauty. It looks like a painting, although it's not. And a similar one here where our leaves are placed in this this gradient here. And I wanted to show you a really cool video on him. He's probably the most famous. We'll do that in a minute. Let me just go to another sort of like seminal piece. The Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson is out in Utah. Was created back in 1970. And I was thinking, oh, he made it in April. I wonder if it coincided with Earth Week, like now. I wonder if that was the timeline for that. But so this is a permanent jetty that he built in a spiral or mandala type shape. And sometimes, depending on the water, it can rise above it and only portions are seen, and other times it's fully seen like this. But this is a permanent piece where, for example, a lot of Andy Goldsworthy's piece, like these leaves, will only be here, temporarily as the wind blows or the water will wash things away. And so I want to show you this clip about the artist Andy Goldsworthy before we go on.
I'm a sculptor. I work directly with the land, working with materials I find in the landscape, whether it be Japan, the North Pole, but it's the landscape around my home that's the most important to me, and it's that landscape to which I keep returning, and is the place that I can learn most about nature and my relationship with it. The river is a pathway, but unlike a road which takes you through the landscape, the river takes you into it. You go into the heart of the place. So I'm always returning to the river. But the thing that really draws me to this place is the color, and that's the color red. And although you can't see that color, that is another reason why I'm attracted to it, because it's hidden. And yet there is a very intense red contained within this place. It's a soft stone you can find amongst the pebbles. There's sometimes more of it than at others. I'll see if I can find some. Here's a bit, yeah. This is the stuff. I mean, that for me is magical to find that here. There's a great chunk of it. I have found this red in many places throughout the world, in Australia, Japan, California. And for a while I used to talk about it as a vein that ran round the earth. And it has made, this color has made me aware of the connections and flows throughout the earth. And I also like that connection. The reason this is red is because of its iron content, which is the reason our blood is red too. This stone is one that I've made works on. It's one that I covered completely in yellow leaves when it was autumn, yellow elm leaves. And then when I went to Japan, I covered a rock there that was covered in Japanese maple leaves, the red rock, and the two together were a pair. And because my work is most rooted in my home place, I'm always connecting back to rocks and places here. And even today, there's a red kind of rim to this this pool. I'm almost half tempted to try and cover that rock, the pool in red. In fact, I may do that. actually worked inside of this chamber that's in behind, well, within that rock, and made several pieces within there. It's a wonderfully worn, sculpted interior. I collected these hazel leaves on the way. I often do that when I'm walking because they were particularly vivid. When they're put in water, they take on an incredible vibrancy. I'm thinking that I maybe work there, possibly cover the pool with leaves. There is the possibility of maybe 5 pools that somehow align up alongside the river, so there'll be this animation between pool to pool alongside the flow of water. Anyway. A river is one of the most unpredictable elements to work with. It's not like the sea, where you can anticipate the rises. And I've laid many works in wait for the river to rise up and wash the works away. But I've very rarely been able to achieve it. In winter, because it's deep, the sun doesn't reach in here so much, and these dripping walls create icicles that I'm able to work with. And because the sun doesn't get in here, I can work with them freeze together. So this is the place I've made most of my ice works in this country. Hollow ice ball, the ice star, the icicle explosion was on that rock, and horizontal icicles, and just behind it, the icicle that's wrapped around the tree. It's a place where the salmon congregate below the waterfall. So there's a compression here in all sorts of ways. Both of the flow of the river downwards and the flow of the fish upwards, upriver. The colour makes the pools a little bit reticent, a bit hidden, which I like a lot, but I have to do a partner work to that in either red stone, or even orange leaves, or even yellow leaves, or even a sequence of some of them.
So let's see. Go back to my Zoom. Oops, sorry. Okay, and so as you saw there, that was just a clip from Andy Goldsworthy, who is one of my all-time favorites, and you can see why. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about what work we've done at our William and Mary Wellness Center. So let me pull that up really quick. And I will share the screen again. One sec. Oops. Why am I not? Okay. There we go. So we talked about some artists, Andy Goldsworthy, as well as Robert Smithson. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about at William and Mary. At our wellness center, I teach a class on art and wellness and expressive arts, and we've done some eco art ourselves. So this is an example of a balancing stone sculpture. I've had the students pair up into groups and go out into nature and collect materials and then create art. So here's a few different examples. They got into groups of 4 or so, collected just natural materials, and then decided as a group what they wanted to create. Here's a really beautiful mandala type of piece. This is a little tough to see here, but the students did kind of like a color gradient thing of like red to orange to yellow to green. And this is a really beautiful kind of like starburst type image. And then these are in particular balancing stone sculptures, which we're going to work on today. So some students, and if you are able to do this, it takes a lot of time, but it's really fun when you balance rocks in between 2 other items like you have here. The students were kind of collaborating and holding on to it together. It's not quite as simple as just like a solitary one where you would do it on your own, which I wanted to show you kind of cute. Today, when I was preparing for this, my son made one out in the yard all by himself, and that's our dog looking on. But, you know, I was just kind of preparing for this today, and he said, "What are you doing?" And came out, and he enjoyed it too. So it's like, you know, for lots of different ages. And I'll talk a little bit more about balancing stone sculptures, which we're going to do shortly. And just, I wanted to explain the difference of eco art and eco art therapy. Lastly, as I said, I'm an art therapist. So it's a field of psychology based on engagement in artistic mediums, generally like painting, sculpture, drawing, fiber arts, all sorts of arts, and as a means of creative expression, and sometimes through nonverbal communication. So sometimes, like in this group, we'll make art, and most of the time we share at the end, but sometimes a person might say, you know, this is something that I felt that I just don't have words for. It was more just able to be expressed through the artwork itself. So, and artistic talent is not necessary. So that's art therapy. And then I wanted to explain the difference is now eco art therapy, which is kind of like a subcategory of my work that I'm interested in. So it would be the use of eco art therapy. So using natural materials in my sessions with people, or working in nature while we're doing art. As a lot of us have noticed right now with COVID, you know, it feels really good to be outside. Like that's just something that is making me feel better. And so doing my art outside has been really helpful. The reason I got into this is previously I've worked in psychiatric hospitals, and one thing I found is that for folks that are in the hospital, whether it's hospital for physical ailments or for mental health, they are not allowed outside for multiple different reasons. And so I said, well, if people can't go outside, I'm going to bring the outside in. So I did my graduate research on eco art therapy, bringing materials from nature into people in the LOC psychiatric unit, and noticing how using materials from nature versus just traditional art materials helped. There's been tons of studies out there on how nature is healing. For example, the really famous study on if you have a patient in a hospital room without a window versus a patient with a window, and how much faster the patient with a window to a view outside heals versus folks that don't have a window. So this was what I looked at and how I got interested in this. Again, I talked about how right now the use of art as well as natural materials is really helpful while we're all so feeling kind of stuck and trapped inside. So this is a great way to do that, whether you're just making art outside or using materials from nature as a way to kind of help yourself during this time. And then just wanted to lastly talk about, we have a variety of offerings at the Wellness Center at William & Mary for art therapy, and obviously right now a lot of our virtual groups. So let me stop sharing and come back. Did I stop sharing? Did I stop sharing? Give me the thumbs up. Okay, good. Sorry, technology's not my thing. Okay, so I have with me a few different examples of eco art. One so popular right now is just the painted rock idea, right? They're like everywhere. People paint like really fun and funny things and plant them places, which is really neat. But this was a project I've done a lot in the past, which is just abstractly painting on a rock and even putting like a word of, you know, some sort of reminder for yourself on the back, almost like a mantra. So that's a fun way to do some eco art if you have paints. Also, this is just like, picked it up right on the way inside here. We have a garden right now, and I made my garden labels with my kiddos just out of rocks. So for each different vegetable or plant, we did that. But today, what we're here to do is a balancing stone sculpture. So, oh, thanks. Somebody wrote, I love that. Okay. So, the beauty of these balancings, I'm just like, I'm an old person, so that when the chat pops up, I'm like, neat, someone's talking. Okay. So the beauty of this is that you can go into nature and collect these items, or just do it in nature and leave it. Like I've been on plenty of hiking trails where you go along there and then you're like, oh, wow, look at this really cool thing someone built and just like left here. It's like this fun, really natural surprise. So I have with me a collection of natural materials that I want to go through. Mostly I wanted to use balancing rocks, but I wanted to show as a base because I think we talked about this in a different group this week, but my husband is a geologist, and these are really fancy, very old shell fossils from just this area in particular, 3 million years old. So I was like, whoa, this could be a really neat base. But again, thinking about all the balancing, so that might, you know, if you're feeling risky, this one's going to be wobbly. So usually what I do, I just have a variety of rocks I brought from inside. I think I'm going to start with this really cool fossilized oyster shell as a nice base. I hope that's what it is. Gosh, I would have a real like burn from my husband if I was wrong, but I think so. Okay, so I'm going to start with that, and then what I find is really cool is when people like, say for example, I didn't do it in height order, like that always looks really neat, but I'm going to do that just simply here. So I'd love for you to watch me, or you can work on your own, because we will shortly, I'll end the recording and we can interact more, and we can share ours or do it together. So, you know, it's nice to integrate some of these like thinner rocks with some of the larger, and even just the act of creating this is such a mindful process, because you really have to notice all those small details within your rocks, right? Like noticing all the crevices, how it balances, the size, the shape. And so we'll see. And sometimes it falls, and that's okay. I spend a lot of time in my groups at William and Mary talking about, ooh, I like that, talking about mistakes in art, and how, you know, in art therapy, it's not about having a final masterpiece or like this perfect thing. But you know, it's about practicing making mistakes and starting over again. Like, it's okay. In life, we're going to have these things. And how do you adapt? How do you improvise, I guess, like, you know, from that. So I'm going to just keep adding on. It's almost like Jenga. It's like in nature's Jenga. You can say like, oh, that one's just not going to fly. And sometimes it'll completely fall and be a mess. But it's this really mindful act of like finding just the right balance and just the right shape to go on top. And, you know, this is great to incorporate with your family members. So you can like go out in nature and be like, oh, we need a different one. We need a smaller one. We need this, we need that, to make it work. So just keep adding. And I love to like just leave these around my yard. I don't know why, I just adore seeing them. Like that one that my kiddo had earlier. And so sometimes you might need to shift over. It's fun when people get them to like curve and things like that. And so, oh, I hear the rain coming down right now, which is really added bonus. It's really pretty sound. So you can see this takes some time. I'm going back in and adjusting. That guy doesn't seem like it wants to go on there. And that's okay. So we find a different shape. So it's really neat, the idea, when you can get it between two things, like if you saw on that example, like that becomes very permanent, but it's also really fun to do things like this. Let me try to scoot it a little. Didn't work. Should have left it, but that's okay. This is, again, like the beauty of this stuff. Like nothing is permanent. The sculptures that we put outside of William and Mary, they were there, you know, until nature took its course with them, right? Like, especially the leaves. I think actually the balancing stone sculptures that we put there between two rocks that you saw in the picture stayed for quite some time. They're still probably there, actually. So it's kind of neat. And then like some of Andy Goldsworthy's work, like we looked at, much less permanent, right? Like leaves or ice, things that will melt and change. Get this to a good point. And then what I think we'll do is I will stop the recording and we can interact more. One thing I'm not really used to is this kind of teacherly perspective. As an art therapist, it's really more about interacting and engaging together. But so this is my example, and I am going to, thanks. I'm going to stop the recording now and put it onto the gallery view so we can all interact together. So with that said, thank you very much from the Wellness Center, Eco Art special event on balancing stone sculptures.